August 15, 1971, a Sunday evening, Richard Nixon interrupted regular programming on every major television network in America. He spoke for 18 minutes, and in those 18 minutes, he changed the financial reality of every person on Earth. Without asking a single one of them, without a vote, without a referendum, without debate, he announced quietly, calmly, in the language of economics that most people did not fully understand, that the US dollar would no longer be backed by gold, effective immediately. The most powerful currency in the world, the currency that every other nation on earth had pegged their money to, was now backed by nothing. Not gold, not silver, not any physical asset, just the word of the United States government. And here is the part that will stop you cold. He said it was temporary. He promised to restore convertibility once reforms had been made. 54 years later, it has never been restored, and the consequences of that Sunday evening have touched every dollar you have ever earned, every house you have ever tried to buy, every bill you have ever struggled to pay. Whether you knew it or not, what the gold standard actually was. To understand what Nixon destroyed, you need to understand what was there before. After World War II, in 1944, the leaders of 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The world needed a new financial order. The war had shattered the old one. They agreed on a system. Every country would peg their currency to the US dollar at a fixed exchange rate, and the US dollar would be fixed to gold at $35 per ounce. Meaning, if you held US dollars, you could go to the US Treasury and exchange them for gold at that rate. This was the anchor, the thing that gave money its meaning. Because money backed by gold cannot be created infinitely. You can only print as many dollars as you have gold to back them. Which means the government faces a real constraint on how much it can spend. It cannot fund wars indefinitely through money printing. It cannot run permanent deficits without consequence. It cannot quietly transfer wealth from savers to debtors through inflation. The gold standard was a financial discipline mechanism, a restraint on government, a protection for ordinary people's savings. And on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon removed it. Why he did it. The secret meeting at Camp David. 2 days before his television address, Nixon gathered 15 of his most senior economic advisors at Camp David, in secret, over a weekend, without informing the other nations whose currencies depended on the dollar-gold system. Without notifying France, without informing Germany, without consulting Britain, the decision that would end the monetary system the entire world had built its post-war economy on was made in a private weekend meeting. Here is why it happened. By the late 1960s, America was spending far more than it had. The Vietnam War, the space race, the Great Society social programs, all funded through spending that exceeded tax revenue, which meant the government was printing more dollars in circulation, but the same amount of gold. European countries noticed. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, noticed especially. De Gaulle famously called the dollar's role in the global system America's exorbitant privilege. America could run deficits the rest of the world could not, because every other nation needed dollars and would accept them. De Gaulle decided to call the bluff. France sent a warship to New York Harbor to physically collect France's gold from US reserves. Other countries followed. The gold was draining from Fort Knox. America was running out, and Nixon faced a choice: restore fiscal discipline and stop spending money America did not have, or break the system that required discipline. He broke the system and told the American people it was temporary. What happened next? The consequences most people still cannot see. Nixon said on television that night, "The effect of this action will be to stabilize the dollar." The exact opposite happened. The price of gold went from $35 per ounce in 1970 to over $800 per ounce by 1980. Inflation went from 4.7% in 1971 to over 14% by 1980. The awful recessions of the early 1980s, the worst since the Great Depression, were the consequence of Paul Volcker desperately trying to put the inflation genie back in the bottle by raising interest rates to nearly 20%. But here is the part that connects most directly to your life right now. Before 1971, One person's salary could support an entire family. A single income, a factory worker, a teacher, a mechanic, could buy a house, raise children, take an annual vacation, and retire with dignity. After 1971, that became impossible for most American families. Not because people became lazier, not because families changed their expectations, because the dollar lost its anchor, and without an anchor, governments and banks could create money at will. And when more money chases the same amount of goods, prices rise, but wages do not rise at the same speed. The gap between what things cost and what workers earn has been growing since 1973. The statistics are stark. Since 1971, official U.S. inflation has averaged 4% per year. But the true rate of monetary debasement, what economists call the real loss of purchasing power, has been closer to 6.9% annually. Home prices have grown at 5.4% per year since 1971. Median household incomes grew only 2.5% annually. Today, median home prices are more than 1,600% higher than in 1971. Median household income is only 475% higher. That gap between house prices and wages is not a housing market problem. It is a monetary policy consequence. It is the direct result of removing the constraint that kept money honest. And the dollar itself has lost over 87% of its purchasing power since 1971. 87%. The dollar you hold today is worth 13 cents compared to its 1971 value. Nixon said it would stabilize the dollar. It lost 87% of its value. The Cantillon Effect. Why the rich got richer. Here is the mechanism that made this the most significant wealth transfer in American history. When a government creates new money, that money does not arrive equally in everyone's hands simultaneously. It arrives first in financial institutions, then in asset markets, then gradually, much later, into wages and everyday prices. This is called the Cantillon Effect, named after 18th century economist Richard Cantillon, who described it 300 years ago. The people who receive new money first, before prices have adjusted, can buy assets at old prices. Banks, financial institutions, large corporations, asset holders, by the time the new money reaches ordinary workers, in the form of wages, prices have already risen. The workers' purchasing power has shrunk. The asset owner's wealth has grown. This is why, in the post-1971 world, every injection of new money by the Federal Reserve makes the stock market go up before it makes wages go up. The people who own stocks and real estate benefit first. The people who earn wages pay the cost. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented mechanism named after an economist who described it in 1730. It is running right now, and it is the primary driver of the wealth inequality that has accelerated every single year since 1971. The two-income trap. Your parents could do what you cannot. Before 1971, single-income households were the norm. One person's salary, in most middle-class families, was enough to cover a mortgage, raise children, and save for retirement. After 1971, the number of households requiring two incomes to maintain the same standard of living increased by 50% within 2 decades. By the 2000s, two incomes were effectively the minimum requirement for middle-class life in most American cities. And here is the cruel irony. With two incomes competing for the same housing stock, house prices rose to absorb that additional income. So families worked twice as hard, sent both parents into the workforce, and ended up in the same relative financial position because the system adjusted prices upward to capture the extra income. The hamster wheel got faster. The cage stayed the same size. What you do with this information? So what does any of this mean for your money right now? Understanding the post-1971 monetary system completely changes your financial strategy. In a world of hard money, backed by gold, saving in cash was rational. Cash held its value. Saving was rewarded. In the post-1971 world of fiat currency, saving in cash is financial suicide in slow motion. Every dollar sitting in a low-interest savings account is losing value every single day as the money supply expands and inflation compounds. This is why wealthy people do not hold cash. They hold assets. Real estate. stocks, businesses, gold, commodities, things that rise in price as the money supply expands. The post-1971 financial system is designed by its very architecture to transfer wealth from people who hold cash to people who hold assets, not by accident, by mechanism. The Cantillon Effect ensures that every dollar printed flows through asset markets before it reaches wages, which means in this system, the only rational response is to own assets, not more cash, assets. The moment you understand that, your entire financial strategy changes. You stop trying to save your way to wealth. You start building asset ownership that rises with the money supply. Because in a world where money is constantly being created, the only protection is owning the things that money creation makes more expensive. Nixon removed the gold standard in 1971 to solve a short-term political problem. He created a long-term financial reality that ordinary people are still living inside, without understanding why their dollar buys less every year, why homeownership feels increasingly impossible, and why two incomes feel like barely enough. Now you understand why. And understanding why is the beginning of building a strategy that works with the system rather than against it. Subscribe, because every week on this channel we translate exactly how the system works into exactly what to do with your money. Drop a comment right now. Before 1971, your parents could buy a house on one salary. Can you? And do you now understand why the answer is probably no? Let's go.